Denver Broncos made a surprising acquisition that could be in store for some NFL history in the very near future. Are the Colorado Avalanche getting Mackenzie Blackwood back at just the right time as they continue their 2025 NHL season? And are changes potentially coming up in Boulder for Coach Prime and the Colorado Buffaloes? All things to come on today's Rundown. Thank you so much for joining us as you do each and every day here on the Rundown. While you're here, make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel at DenverSports 1043. You can follow us on that handle at Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. If you're watching us live on X or Facebook Live, we appreciate you very much and can't wait to get it on with you today. Want to welcome in Anilo Piro, friend of the show, the social media guru at DenverSports.com, and somebody who chronicles everything from Buffs to Nuggets to Avs and Broncos. Really kind of a catch-all for us, Anilo. How you doing, man?
I'm good, brother. You know, sports equinox season going on right now. You have the World Series. I know we don't dive into that a ton on this show, but wow, that has been incredible. NFL's in full swing. College football's still going. NBA, welcome to the action. And NHL's doing its thing as well. So busy time here at Denver Sports, but happy to be a part of the team and happy to be here on the show today.
Absolutely. It is a busy time here for the Denver Broncos, who, according to Adam Schefter earlier today, made an acquisition to their practice squad for now that had my eyebrow raised a little bit as it is announced that they are signing 19-year NFL veteran Marcedes Lewis, the tight end who came into the draft in 2006, Anilo. He was draft mates with Jay Cutler, Vince Young, and a litany of other NFL stars from way, way back by this term, by NFL standards today. And yet he is now the newest member of the Denver Broncos practice squad. And you would think, Anilo, if they're going to make this move now, and Sean Payton's clearly looking for help at the tight end position, the Broncos were unsuccessful at multiple waiver claims for tight ends, given what's going on with Lucas Kroll and the struggles that Nate Atkins has had from a health perspective during this young start to the season. They're clearly looking for help in that area, and they seem to have, at least for now, think they've found it in Marcedes Lewis. What was your initial reaction to the signing?
Yeah, kind of the same initial reaction that you had. I was like, who? In what year? This guy? Like Marcedes Lewis, I mean, good for him. 41 years old, you know, still kicking the tires and whatnot. But I think we need to preface, as you kind of alluded to, it's practice squad. Like if Marcedes Lewis is eventually elevated to a real game and whatnot, is on the sideline for the Denver Broncos, he'll be the oldest active tight end to play in an NFL game in the history of the league.
Correct.
So clearly Sean Payton is looking for some depth at the tight end position. And I don't think that this is necessarily directed at Evan Ingram, because Evan Ingram's, you know, that Joker type of role, even though we haven't seen it maybe as much as I thought we would.
Is he really? Because I've been wondering this myself. Do you think Evan Ingram, even though he was labeled as that, I mean, he was tweeting the Heath Ledger Joker gif after the signing during free agency, and that was kind of what we all expected. But when you've watched Evan Ingram through 8 weeks of the NFL season so far, have you thought to yourself, that was the missing ingredient for this offense? That's what Sean Payton's been missing, and now all the cogs in the wheel are starting to turn more efficiently?
No, I haven't felt that way, because Evan Ingram has 26 receptions for 215 yards and 1 touchdown so far. So not exactly lighting the world on fire with his offensive production, but I think the signing of Marcedes Lewis is because he can be more of a big body blocking type of guy, as you alluded to with the injuries to Nate Atkins and some other guys in that room. A different role than that of an Evan Ingram. But if we want to have that conversation as well, like my first thought is, like, if you're signing Marcedes Lewis to play in games potentially and catch passes and catch touchdowns, you have a guy in Evan Ingram who you hyped up all offseason, which you haven't used fully to that role. So clearly Sean Payton likes his vet in Marcedes Lewis here. Don't really understand the full thought process behind it, because I think we still, you know, there's a lot to see with Evan Ingram moving forward this year, but we got a 41-year-old tight end on the practice squad, Rich.
Yeah, and I do think, while we prefaced it, that it is practice squad signing as of now, there is no way, in my opinion, that this practice squad signing doesn't lead to a game day elevation in the next handful of weeks. You would not go out of your way, if you're Sean Payton and George Payton, to acquire Marcedes Lewis at 41 years old, when there are a laundry list of other bodies in the NFL that you could have utilized in that role. You don't choose Marcedes Lewis at 41 years old with all of those other things that come with that, unless you have an intent and a specific design to use it. And I think it will primarily be as a blocker. I don't think that he is going to be much of a receiving threat or a receiving component of the offense. But clearly Sean Payton feels like, and we know that he values blocking from his wide receivers and his tight ends higher than maybe some other coaches and offensive minds around the league. That's the vision that he has for it. But it does kind of leave me wondering, that's the best we could have found. We had to dig a 41-year-old tight end off the street who hasn't played yet this season and has played for 3 different teams over the course of essentially now 4 different teams in 2 decades. I just don't know if I find the signing all that inspiring, and it kind of makes me wonder what the thought process is over at Broncos Park, powered by Common Spirit.
Yeah, and it's definitely a little bizarre, right? Like a 41-year-old tight end, like where's he at this point in his career playing shape-wise? You know, Sean probably has a lot of experience playing against him, coaching against him from his time in New Orleans when he was at the Packers and the Bears, among some other teams as well. But clearly, you know, whether he's going to be like, okay, he's going to be a blocking tight end first in theory. But you also know Sean, you know, passing game, this, that, the other. Like, he's looking for ways to utilize Marcedes Lewis, you would think, in theory, in this passing offense, which again begs the question that you and I talked about all offseason throughout training camp. Is like, is the Broncos wide receiving room good enough? Is Evan Ingram good enough to fit this room? I don't know how
you could go, Anilo, from the game that we just watched against the Cowboys, where it was far and away clearly the best offensive performance that the Broncos have had, maybe in the Sean Payton era, when you're talking about a full 4 quarters of football, but definitely in the 2025 season alone. And look at the performance you got from Troy Franklin. Look at the contributions that you get from a Marvin Mims as you continue to kind of move him around as a chess piece on your board. Look at the steadied contributions and the week-to-week availability and playmaking ability of a Cortland Sutton. R.J. Harvey has his first career breakout game alongside J.K. Dobbins, who rushed for over 100 yards. Evan Ingram is starting to find more footing in the offense. I don't see how you could be on that offensive staff, look at the performance that you got, and say, hey, let's take some carries and some touches away from Troy Franklin or from Evan Ingram or from Marvin Mims, and let's slice in a little bit of Marcedes Lewis. That doesn't make sense to me.
Right, and the trade deadline's coming up here sooner rather than later for the NFL as well. So, like, if they want to target another wide receiver, like, there's different ways that you can go about this right now. Yeah, it's just very, very strange because I agree with you. Like, what Troy Franklin did last Sunday was incredible. R.J. Harvey, welcome to the party with the 3 touchdowns, right? Cortland Sutton is continuing to show.
Pat Bryant got his first career touchdown.
Right, like, they have guys. I don't know why you need to go out and get a 41-year-old other guy with what this Broncos offense is right now. So we'll see. But Sean Payton always thinks he's the smartest person in the room, and he's got the Broncos, you know, winning 5 games in a row. So in Sean, we trust, I suppose.
You know what? I think that is a fair sentiment. I think that the Broncos sitting at 6-2 through 8 games, and their 2 losses came as walk-off losses in the first 3 weeks of the season against 2 of the better teams in the AFC, one of which exists in their own division. And it's probably as good of a start to the season as we here in Broncos country could have asked if we were talking about this 2 months ago. So maybe there is an element of, you know what? Okay, let's just see how this plays out, and we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I was sitting in this chair yesterday, Anilo, talking with our friend Jake Shapiro,
our guy,
about the Denver Nuggets, as he is so tightly wound and connected to the Denver Nuggets, the Buffs, and other teams here locally in the market. And it felt like after their win against Minnesota, I asked Jake, I said, do you think that inside that locker room at Ball Arena, that just felt like getting a monkey off their back? A team in Minnesota that they have not been able to beat, dating back to the 2024 postseason, when Minnesota, as the lower seed, had one of the biggest blowouts in NBA in Denver Nuggets franchise history in the postseason, followed by a Game 7 collapse of 20-plus points, which was one of the biggest collapses in NBA postseason in Nuggets history. And then it continued through a regular season that was filled with sweeps. They play the Minnesota Timberwolves without Anthony Edwards, which puts a little bit of an asterisk, I suppose, if you want to go that route, next to the game. But they finally beat Minnesota, and it's like, man, is that kind of just like a monkey off the back? And I think the Colorado Avalanche, Anilo, may have gotten a little bit of monkey off of their back as well, as they complete an 8-goal victory, 8-4, over the New Jersey Devils. And in the process, they found a way to make it work on the power play. They were going into this game, Manilo, with a power play unit that was 4 for 39 through the first 10 games of the season. I'll save you the math. That's 10.3%, last in the National Hockey League. And then they go into the game last night against the Devils. They score 4 times in 6 chances on the power play. And in the process, snap a 4-game losing streak of their own by beating a team that was riding an 8-game win streak. The New Jersey Devils are not a bad hockey team. I think this was a quality win. And I think that given the power play struggles that we've seen from the Avs, that were the primary reason they got walked off their own ice in Game 7 against the Dallas Stars, and then it struggled through the beginning of this season, for them to be able to finally go out and show what they are capable of with a man advantage, I think is a big confidence boost for this team.
Yeah, no, I think it's huge. And much like the Nuggets, right? Like this is a pretty important season for the Colorado Avalanche. Just full year of Gabe Landeskog, right? Nathan McKinnon in his prime, Cale Makar, a lot of different moving parts. Like it is very much a championship or bust type of mentality with this Avalanche team, looking at the goaltending as a whole. And you talk about how important it was for the Avalanche to, get right on the power play, but they also just lost their previous game to the Devils the night, or maybe not the night before, but the last time they played 4-3. Mm-hmm. So to come back and rally off an 8-4 win when the power play is the star of your show, I think is huge for the momentum for this Colorado Avalanche team moving forward, because you like their top line, you like their depth as well, at least where it's compared to the last season, the goaltending on top of that. So yes, I do think it was very important for the Avalanche to get some semblance of confidence when it comes to this power play unit. I think you saw that last night.
And I felt validated a little bit personally, selfishly, Anilo, listening to Jared Bednar after the game when he was asked about, well, what changed? What's different? What did you do? And you know what Bednar said? We just started hammering the puck on net. I think there's been too many times, and I said it on this show, and I've said it on Denver Sports 104 through the Fan. I just think that the Avalanche, who as a core function of their identity since they won the Cup, has been their relentless ability to maintain pressure in the offensive zone and pepper shots on goal to make the opposing goaltender's life miserable for 3 consecutive periods. When they won the Cup in that 2021 and 2022 season, it was almost like hard to watch if you were a fan of the other team, just how wave after wave after wave, it didn't matter if it was your top 6, your bottom 6, your middle 6, the shots on goal disparity from the Avalanche to their opponents was so stark that you were like, man, if they're even converting at a reasonable clip, you're going to have to score 4 or 5 goals to beat them. And they've carried with those same skaters for the most part, at least from a core sense, minus Mikko Rantanen, but they've carried that same identity with them for a handful of years. They just haven't had the consistency between the pipes, which they now seem to have found with Wedgwood and Blackwood. And to see them have that completely disappear when they have a man advantage, it defied science to me. And it didn't make sense. And the only logic and explanation that I could think of was that they're just trying to get too cute. They're searching for the perfect shot. They have such skilled skaters and skilled shooters that they're looking for the perfect shot, which is how Bednar phrased it. We weren't looking for the perfect shot. We were just trying to hammer it with Natchez, with McKinnon, with Cale, with all these talented players that we have on our power play unit. Just go out there and do your thing. And that's what they did.
I think you hit the nail on the head. And with the level of talent that Colorado has across the roster, like, you want to pepper the goal. You want to keep firing shots, because at some point, with the amount of talent that Colorado has between McKinnon, Makar, Nichushkin, Olofsson last night as well with his performance, like, these pucks are going to find the back of the net. And I agree with you. I think they got to stop playing with their food a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Like, everything doesn't need to be perfectly symmetrical. This pass doesn't have to be perfect. When you have Nathan McKinnon and company out there, just keep ripping shots on goal. And I think obviously when you score 8 goals last night, there's going to be plenty of shots to go around. But what's most encouraging to me is just looking at the box score, right? Ross Colton with 3 shots on goal, Landeskog with a shot on goal, Arturi Lehkonen with 3, McKinnon with 5, 2 of which find the back of the net. Nichushkin actually didn't have a shot on goal last night, and Olofsson as well with his 7. That, I think, is the recipe for success for this Avalanche team, in particular on the power play, but offense in general, is make life miserable on your opponent and their goaltender in particular, because they have the shooters out there, do the Avalanche.
You mentioned a career night for Victor Olofsson, 5 points, found a hat trick with 2 assists to make the 5 there. And that, I think, was encouraging, because even though it was kind of an under the radar level signing, and I think a certain amount of signings for the Avs have kind of gone that way, because you're not outside of, trading Mikko Rantanen for Natchez and making a blockbuster shuffling of the deck like that. A lot of the acquisitions that they were making are middle 6 and bottom 6 depth additions. But Victor Olofsson is an elite shooter in the NHL. He is somebody that can have the potential to go off the way he did against the Devils, not necessarily maybe on a night-to-night basis, but you can see with Olofsson, you've seen it with Gavin Brindley. You're seeing some of these pieces that are becoming more major contributors this year, that they are earning and gaining trust. I know Logan O'Connor is still missing. He is still recovering from a 2nd consecutive offseason hip surgery and lower body issues there. But that 4th line with Bardakov, Brindley, and Parker Kelly, which the 4th line when Logan O'Connor's typically on the ice is one of my favorites to watch for the Avs, because they just fly around, they play with intensity, and they have explosive offensive scoring potential. And so to see that 4th line with those guys play the way they did, Olofsson moving up a little bit higher from the bottom 6 into the middle 6 there, I was really encouraged by what I saw. And I think you couple that with Mackenzie Blackwood, backing up Scott Wedgwood. So back in the lineup, but not starting between the pipes quite yet. That is coming in the very near future. And I think that Mackenzie Blackwood's return is kind of coming at just the right time, because Scott Wedgwood started the season on fire. And it reminded me, and I'm sure many others here in town, that Scott Wedgwood's a pretty damn good goalie. Okay. And so when you're talking about backup goaltenders around the league, I don't have a list in front of me, but I'd be willing to bet he's closer to the top of that list, Scott Wedgwood is, than he is the bottom. But there's also a reason why Mackenzie Blackwood solidified himself as the starter. And this team, with what I think they're capable of in the regular season, which is contending for a President's Trophy and really solidifying a top seed in going into the NHL playoffs, him being back and healthy and available sooner rather than later, I think is a good thing, because eventually it did feel like the meteoric start that Scott Wedgwood was going to have would eventually level off, if not come back down to earth. And it felt like it started to do that a little bit in the last handful of games.
Yeah, and obviously you want Mackenzie Blackwood back as soon as possible. Scott Wedgwood's done a really good job of holding it down, as Richie alluded to, and it gives you confidence that if Mackenzie Blackwood has to miss a game here or a game there, or maybe isn't right as soon as he comes back to the ice, that you have a competent backup in Scott Wedgwood. And look, the last week or so for the Avalanche has not been great, and I know there was, 2 overtime losses, 1 shootout loss, but to your point, it feels like it's time for Mackenzie Blackwood to get back and reassert himself as a starting goaltender for this Colorado Avalanche team, again with Scott Wedgwood acting as your safety blanket. But I think, look, all things considered, love the win last night. Didn't like what you saw from the week prior, but isn't it nice that you and I can sit here and actually take a deep breath?
Yes.
And not have to worry about the Alexander Georgievs of the world and just goaltending problems, being persistent throughout the course of the season. It seems like you're not going to win every game, Avalanche fans, but you have to feel confident as you felt since you won the Stanley Cup in your goaltending position.
Correct. I made that assertion before the start of the season. I was talking with Will Peterson on the show, and I said, Will, I think I have as much, if not more, confidence in both the 2025 Denver Nuggets and the 2025 Colorado Avalanche to win a title in their respective sports since I have had the confidence in the year that they won it. I think I am just as, if not more, confident in this year's squads than I was in the 2 that won the titles in back-to-back years. I really mean that, and I think that we are genuinely looking at a real opportunity, and we'll see how the regular season shakes out, where you're talking about double parades in Denver in the NBA and the NHL.
I don't want to go crazy. Why not triple with the way the Broncos are playing right now?
I'm telling you what, I wasn't going to put it in there, but man, they're at the top of the division. They're the number 3 seed, if my memory serves, in the AFC. And the schedule that they have in front of them isn't necessarily among the easier in the NFL. But if we can find offensive consistency the way that they found it in the fourth quarter against the Giants and for 4 quarters against the Dallas Cowboys, there aren't a ton of teams in a year where it doesn't feel like there's a truly elite NFL team. There are fewer and fewer reasons why the Denver Broncos, if they can perform like they did last week, now I know it was against the worst defense in the NFL, but if they can take even a percentage of that, 70, 75% of the firepower we saw against the Cowboys on a week-to-week basis, that team's going to be set up for success.
Yeah, 100%. And look, I think you have to put the Broncos in a different category than the Nuggets and the Avalanche. Like, I truly believe, along with Richie, that the Nuggets and the Avalanche are primed for big, long championship-esque runs for them this offseason. But in the NFL right now, like, you're used to like a juggernaut, right? Brady's Patriots, Brady's Bucks, Roethlisberger's Steelers, whoever it might be. You don't have that team right now. I know the Chiefs are kind of rounding into form, but you can make a legitimate argument, to Richie's point, if the Broncos can get more consistent on offense and play the way they've been playing on defense. Look, man, this is the golden era of Denver sports. I always like to say that when I'm on these airwaves and, doing these shows and whatnot, because it's never going to be as good as it is right now in regards to all of these teams being competitive at the same time. So buckle up, DenverSports.com, social media, we got you covered, but sit back and enjoy the ride, man. What a time to be a Denver sports fan.
I'll give a shout out to one of our part-time hosts on the station. His name's Chad Andrus. He covered the NBA for years. Yeah, I love Chad. He laid out a stat on Denver Sports Tonight last week that it kind of made my brain itch a little bit trying to think about that. The Nuggets, Avs, and Broncos have not been as good as they are simultaneously, all 3 teams simultaneously, in 20 years. You have to go all the way back to like the 2005, 2006 season when the Broncos were in a position to be the way that they are record-wise comparable to this year, that the Nuggets and Avalanche were both good. We've had maybe certainly 1 and sometimes 2 teams simultaneously, like the Nuggets and the Avs in the Jokic-McKinnon kind of era, but the Broncos were never holding up their end of the bargain. You got to go back 2 decades to find a period of time where 3 of the 4 major sports teams here in town were as good as they are simultaneously. a school that seems to be heading in the wrong direction for that conversation, Danilo, that I know that you have close personal ties to, is the Colorado Buffaloes. They suffer one of the worst losses, certainly in the Coach Prime era, and you probably could put it near a list in terms of one of the more embarrassing blowout losses in program history, certainly recent program history. They get blown out by nearly 50 points to the Utah Utes. And Anilo, I struggle with the ongoing evaluation and the week-to-week conversation around the Colorado Buffaloes. And I've actually struggled with this for a couple of years now, and I'll tell you why. Coach Prime coming to Boulder was one of the more unexpected turns of events in my time covering sports here in this market. You could have shown me odds from various different apps and websites that said it was going to be this to come here or this to go there. I never thought that a team that was left for dead with the dismissal of Carl Durrell, a 1-11 program that was rated the worst Power 5 at the time program in college football. And then Deion Sanders comes in. He makes them the center of the college football universe from an eyeball perspective. And they win 4 games in their first year, which you say, okay, that's a burn year. He's the transfer portal king. He brought all of his Louis luggage, yada, yada, yada. And suddenly there's a life. There was a defibrillator shock there. Then with Shedeur Sanders, who maybe didn't deserve to have his jersey retired, but he's one of the better quarterbacks in recent CU history. There's no doubt. And the 2-way Heisman Trophy winner in Travis Hunter. They win 9 games, but it felt, at least to me, like there was still some meat left on that bone. They have that game against Kansas. Devin Neal runs them into the ground, and the runway lights that were on for them to make a Big 12 title appearance completely shut off. And then you go into this season, and you're in year 3 of the Coach Prime era, and I, as an observer, am starting to think, okay, year 3 is probably fair to say the rubber's going to meet the road, right? But then you factor in they lose Shedeur and Travis. They lose a host of talent in the wide receiver position to the NFL. You've got transfers coming in and transfers coming out. So there's a lot of moving parts and moving pieces, and there's pushback saying, well, this is kind of a rebuild year. You got to figure out what you got at quarterback. And I start to say, can you have a rebuild year in the current the transfer portal era of college football with the Wild West landscape that exists? It feels like the Buffs are backsliding a little bit. And Anilo, help me for my own personal sanity with some clarity on at what point can we start to hold some feet to the fire and have expectations for a program that seems to be trending in the wrong direction.
You lay out a ton of tremendous points, and I want to answer your question with a question back to you, because you started out talking about the dormant Carl Durrell years. Would you take this iteration of the Colorado Buffaloes year over year or go back to what you had before Deion?
Well, I think that's a loaded question, but yes, right. I would go back, or I would not go back to what we had pre-Deion. But if you're telling me that, if you're asking me if I'm okay with accepting the current iteration, we should be honest about what that is, right? Which is a program that is going to be on national TV at almost every opportunity, but they're probably a 5 to 7 win team on average. They might make a Cheetos Bowl here and there.
Pop-Tart Bowl.
Well, no, the Pop-Tart Bowl is a big deal now.
True.
That's a marquee bowl. They might make a Tax Slayer Bowl here and there, but they are not going to be a legitimate threat in the Big 12 Conference, which is one of the more winnable Power 4 conferences that currently exist in this landscape. And they are certainly not going to be a college football playoff threat and contender, even with an expanded format. And we'll see how expansion continues. So am I willing to accept that as the Colorado Buffaloes because it's better than them being 1-11 every year? Sure. But that feels like I'm settling for a deal that's lower than what most people should strive for.
No, and I think you're 100% right, and I validate your opinion because I think you have a right to feel that way. I just don't.
Thank you.
I don't envision a scenario where Deion Sanders is not the Colorado Buffaloes head coach unless it's on his terms. And I think my thing, and I've talked about this with you off air, on air now, I don't think Deion would know what to do with all that time on his hands if he wasn't coaching. Like, I believe Deion when he says he's not going anywhere. He loves coaching. He loves Colorado, all that kind of stuff. And I'm a Deion guy. I'm not afraid to admit that. I was all hyped up when he came here. I'm still kind of willing to see all this out. But yeah, like all the frustration that you kind of alluded to is valid. And I think when I can't say organization, but when the school kind of sweeps that under the rug, that's where the fan base, I think, gets a bit irritated because they want that accountability that Deion himself preaches all the time. So look, I think this is a funky year. I think it's a down year. I don't think this defines Deion Sanders necessarily as the head coach for the Colorado Buffaloes. Now, you might say that it is the definition of the 3 years we've seen.
What does define Deion Sanders as the head coach of the Colorado Buffaloes?
And it's against my will because I'm a wins and losses guy, but I think it's just reinvigorating a program that was dead. The Colorado Buffaloes football program was lifeless before Deion Sanders. And I understand there was that fun couple of years or 1 year, whatever it was with Mel Tucker, but I think Deion has made the Colorado Buffaloes relevant again. And I do think his celebrity status and everything that comes with Deion can get the right guys in the portal to build up a program. It just hasn't worked out the way that he envisioned it this year. But there are some questions that need to be answered. Like, what's going on with this offense? What's going on with Pat Shurmur? What's going on with Caden Salter? Why are defensive guys? I mean, there was a report that came out that, some of these guys did not come back in time from the bye week and didn't play in the first half of the game against Utah, right?
Yep.
So internally, there's a mess that needs to be cleaned up, and Deion Sanders is responsible for that. But I do think Deion Sanders is capable of cleaning this mess up and getting this program back on track as it was last season.
Well, if he's going to clean it up, he's going to need to find a way to provide a spark for his program. And I say that intentionally because we are nearing close to an anniversary of a change that Coach Prime made within his staff where he relieved his offensive coordinator, Sean Lewis, of his duties in the middle of the season and then handed them over to Pat Shurmur, who then has carried on since that point. Do you envision, Anilo, Coach Prime making a change specifically with his offensive coordinator and Pat Shurmur? And you could say this about Robert Livingston on the defensive side as well, because they haven't been able to stop a nosebleed most weeks, certainly not this past week against Utah. Do you envision that in the upcoming future for the Colorado Buffaloes?
No, I don't think Pat Shurmur is going anywhere this season. I don't even know if he's going anywhere this offseason. Pat Shurmur and Deion Sanders are like this, man. Like, they are arm in arm with this thing. And, Shurmur is one of Deion's guys. And I don't think Deion, here's the other thing. I don't think that, you just saw what happened at LSU, right? And Brian Kelly, the boosters and the governor and all this stuff talking about how we need to get off Brian Kelly. I don't think Rick George and the CU boosters are going to Deion and saying, hey, we got to make a change at offensive coordinator. I don't think that conversation will happen personally. Maybe it does. I'm not sure. But I think Deion is loyal to Pat Shurmur, maybe even loyal to a fault. But I think anybody.
It is to a fault.
It is to a fault, right? But I think at this point, it's about preserving what you have with this program. It's about keeping Julian Lewis happy, right? We'll even see if Julian Lewis plays because there's the debate about do you redshirt him, do you not redshirt him?
Why would he? And if he does, it certainly wouldn't come until probably the West Virginia game to preserve that red shirt.
My argument with not
why would you burn a year at this point?
Right. And my argument with that is if Julian Lewis and the program thinks he could be what he ended up will being, he's not going to need a redshirt year. This is a guy that should be going to the league in a couple of seasons if he lives up to the expectation and the potential that he has for himself. So it's obviously a very, very bizarre situation. But I do agree with you. I mean, at some point, there's got to be some accountability. You can't just keep preaching and, looking to the sky and saying things are going to get better when the offense is absolutely pitiful out there and you get boat raced in the manner in which you did against Utah. I don't think anything will come throughout the course of this season, but I'll be very interested to see if Deion makes a move or two come the offseason.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna try to pin you down one more time here because we've laid out a handful of things. You talked about how there's no world that you see that Deion Sanders is no longer the head coach of the Colorado Buffaloes unless it's on his terms.
Yes.
So you don't think Rick George and the CU Board of Regents and all of that, the university and the donors and everybody are really able to almost go to Deion and say these things because of what he brings from an eyeball standpoint, maybe a revenue generation standpoint, admissions boosts, and things like that. But he's loyal to a fault to the wrong name, at least in this case, in my opinion. I'll put that on my own eyeballs and evaluation in Pat Shurmur. It hasn't worked out with Robert Livingston. You don't 100% know whether changes are going to be made. So it seems like there's a lot of uncertainty, and it feels like you're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place where you may want more success on the football field, but you may not be willing to, if you're CU, part ways with the eyeballs and some dollar signs or generate the dollars to be able to make a move away from some of the highest paid assistants and or one of the highest paid coaches in college football. So that's kind of a lot of red tape to have to wade through. Anilo, is the pride and tradition of the Colorado Buffaloes entrusted in someone in Deion Sanders that you have confidence and faith as an alumni, as someone who's tied closely to the program? can turn this thing into what we envisioned it would be when he set foot on campus a handful of years ago.
I still believe in Coach Prime.
You
man.
do.
I do. I think that this is, like I said, I'm a Dion guy. I think that this has been an unfortunate season. I think it's been an absolute mess. I've been at every single home game. I've been in the press conferences. I've been sitting there front and center. It has been a mess. And I'll put this out there as well. Pat Shurmur is not the guy for this offense. Like, Pat Shurmur has to go, in my personal opinion. I'm just saying, I don't think Dion is making that decision because him and Pat are buddies. And we'll see what happens come the offseason and whatnot. But the other thing is, where I kind of started this conversation with you, I don't want to see CU go back to where they were before, which was irrelevant. And I understand that's not everything, but you mentioned the dollars and the cents and whatnot. Dion is still a good football guy. I understand maybe he's not great.
What does that mean, though? What does it mean?
Is Mario Cristobal an excellent college football coach, or is he a great recruiter?
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Right,
excellent.
but like,
I don't know if I use the word excellent.
How many times do we see Mario Cristobal fumble the bag at the end of games because he doesn't know when to call timeouts or clock management?
Or Nia football.
Right, all that kind of stuff. I think that Deion Sanders can still get the right guys in here. I think there are some good guys on the, like Tafik Bayard is a guy, win or loss, comes up to that podium, same mentality every day. I think there's some decent foundation being laid. But I think it's still going to take some time for this whole thing to come together. They're recruiting more high school players than they have before. There's no ifs, ands, or but about it. This season has been a failure. It's been an utter disappointment for CU. But I don't think you can just limit the overall success or failures to Deion Sanders to just this 1 year. What he did last year was spectacular. Obviously, they fell short of the expectations that I thought they could have reached. But again, Colorado football, for like the first time really in my lifetime, is front and center in the hearts and minds of football fans. That in and of itself means something. And I do think Coach Prime is a good enough recruiter, a good enough man to go out there and get this program back on track. He's not a guy that's going to run away from adversity. I think Coach Prime is here to stay. I think the only thing that could force Deion Sanders to remove himself from Colorado on a day-to-day basis is
health.
The medical stuff.
Yeah, health. That's a very real thing, and that's an unfortunate thing. I mean, it feels like he's gone under the knife in some capacity in basically every year that he's been coaching up here in Boulder, and obviously we wish nothing but
yes,
well wishes and good vibes in that regard. And I hope you're right, Anilo, because I'll just say from my perspective, I don't know that I have the faith and the confidence in the vision and the plan and the launch trajectory for the Buffs that I did when he first set foot on campus as I sit here today. But I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that you're right, because the college football landscape seems to be more exciting when the Buffs have the eyeballs and the attention brought in by Deion, and the product and the substance is backed up on the field the way that it was when they had their first Heisman Trophy winner in several decades, and they had a quarterback in Shedeur Sanders who was a polarizing figure and somebody that was able to put out a product week to week that was enjoyable to watch. And I think that the sports landscape here in the state is more vibrant. It's more exciting. Saturdays mean a lot more when the Buffs are relevant, and the Rams are certainly trying to fight their own demons and work through that regard as well. So we'll see how it shakes out. I hope you're right. I hope I'm wrong. I just have some reservations. That is going to do it for today's show. Thank you all so much for joining me. Thank you, Anilo. Appreciate everything you do for us on our Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan social channels and at DenverSports.com. Thank all of you for watching and listening. Make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube page at Denver Sports 104.3. You can also find us there on Instagram and TikTok. And shout out to everyone watching on Facebook Live and X as well. We will catch you at noon tomorrow for the next rundown.
I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the work.